You're listening to A Game We Can Play, a story written and read by Philip Ballerscheff. If you'd like to read along to the stories or subscribe to the blog that I upload these stories to, you can find a link to that in the description. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, as always, so you can get any stories I might upload in the future, or you can check out some that I've uploaded in the past. In a way, she began. And then again, no, he finished. He gestured at her, as if to grant her the right to speak without further interruption. They were sitting at Mike's kitchen countertop on the bar stools he installed for just such an occasion. Victor had been teasing her for a while, but it was never enough for him to be satisfied, or for her to walk away. His favorite game as of late was to interject a bit of fun into what she said. Only a bit, not a full sentence. He had a gift for knowing when to make his remarks, whether they were meant seriously and said with humor, or done the other way around. Sylvia's frustration confined itself to playful grimaces and light slaps. Sometimes she only acted them out, if, say, she was holding something or he was out of reach. He was a comedian of a peculiar kind. If you put him up on stage and asked everyone for quiet, he'd bomb. If you let him mingle with his audience, put him and them on equal footing, he did better. But you could do it if you wanted to. Really, you could, she said. When he made her laugh, that's what she told him. When he annoyed her, she told him he was pathetic. He liked her praise, but every time he had to remind her that he didn't want to be a comedian or get up on stage for any reason. What stopped him was his lack of ambition for that line of work, he said. He didn't consider it long enough to have doubts or dreams. Nevertheless, for her sake, he pretended to be a proper comedian, one whose routine was more refined than quips on other people's conversations. He remembered so much that he could never have lived long enough to do it all. He knew almost everyone and had been almost everywhere. His comedy was a mix of observations and impressions of those he described, of which little was current. But all he'd have to do was watch the news for more material, she told herself. Evidently, he hadn't done so in some time. After that, Victor set his sights on Mike's taste. One joke about his furniture, another about the paintings he had bought. To cover up his walls and nothing else, Victor said, and then he was done. That's mean, Sylvia said, rapping Victor on his arm. I mean well. He isn't behind me, is he? No, but he shouldn't say such things, no matter if Mike was or not. Then make with some entertainment, Victor snapped. There was light music all throughout the house. It played so softly that you had to shut up to really hear it, and that's what the two of them did. Still sitting, they danced as well as they could, given those limitations, swinging their arms lightly and twisting a little in their seats, and then stopping as suddenly as they had begun when the mood for dancing left them. They were getting to be properly drunk now, something both acknowledged without alarm or any plan to stop or slow or even increase their drinking. They would continue at this steady pace. Drinking makes life simple, she said, pausing as if that was all she would say. By blocking what you don't understand and making it easy to dismiss what little of that gets through. Too dumb to worry, Victor said, summarizing her rambling. If I let you go on like that, we'd be here all night. What, are we going already? No, but... All right then, she said. See, we would have argued, but I stopped it. Shaking his head and blinking his eyes, he looked around for a bottle and got her a new drink instead. He liked to touch her when he got drunk, liked to hold her hand and her shoulder and her waist. When their drinking had finally made slapstick funny, they tried that too, she making a game of slapping him and he catching her by the wrist. An elbow, whose he didn't know, knocked over his glass. He caught it mid-fall and set it on the counter. Might as well be careful. We can't get new glasses at this hour, Victor said. Well, we can, but Mike wouldn't like that. The minor rhyme made Sylvia smile. His attempts to do it again made her roll her eyes. Everything in the room was warm and stale, the walls, the air, and the conversations she heard. It wasn't their fault for being like they were. She stood up from her chair and got out of his grasp. "Where are you going?" he asked. "What's wrong?" "I don't feel good." "Well, don't do that. We have a whole night ahead of us." He searched up a glass and took water from the sink. "I couldn't find anything better on such short notice." She thanked him with the earnestness of a drunk. Victor opened a window a little. Even standing close to it, she noticed no difference in the air. She reconsidered what she wanted, then opened it wide and went out into the backyard. A voice she didn't recognize came up from behind and asked if she had needed some fresh air. She answered yeah, before she turned to see who she was talking to. It was nobody she knew. There was nothing about him that made her think they had met before. The man waited until the silence reestablished itself before breaking it again. "So how do you know him?" he asked. "Who?" "Never mind. I know Mike, and I didn't know you, and I've this funny idea that everyone at a party might know the host." "Well, I do know him, but I didn't know who him was supposed to be. And now I don't know you. I guess we're just talking at cross purposes." He spoke straight ahead. There was nothing to drown him out, no reason for him to turn her away. The clouds moved slowly across the sky, but all the wind was up there. Here it was calm. "So how did you get here?" he asked. "Victor's a friend of Mike's, and I'm his +1. Are you a friend of Victor's?" She thought if the man meant girlfriend, which she wasn't. "Yeah, I am. I thought so." With that, he went back inside, evidently having waited for the right time to end their talk with a remark that wasn't insulting, except in its abruptness. Still light-headed, she gulped air to help her recovery. And goodbye, she thought, when the time for that joke had passed. It was easy to imagine that the man was still there, able to hear her. Victor would have said that. Smart or not, he could talk without anything to say. He was great at parting shots, too, those that really hurt, and those that, like her slaps, were affectionate and harmless. The best she ever managed was calling him girlish, to which he'd said she was insulting herself. At the time, they were fighting about something that wasn't worth the words they threw at each other. A misunderstanding, probably, or a hurt small enough to be ignored. That's such a, she would have said, faggot thing to say, had she not interrupted herself. "God, listen to yourself. Say it straight," she told him instead. Later, when they'd made up, he told her what she should have said. He put on a voice somewhere between his and hers, and slid from one to the other as he played both roles. "You're only insulting yourself," he said, as himself, drawing the words up into his nose. "I'm supposed to be a girl," he said as her. "You aren't." She smiled at how clean his jokes were, how he could turn it around on her without being vicious. Her memories of that day ended there. She felt renewed guilt for something she hadn't even said, but had thought, and that was almost as bad. Behind her, though she could neither hear nor see them, she was sure Victor was joking with the others, popping into their circles only to leave again to ensure his entrance was never ruined by a prolonged stay, during which he might grow boring. She went inside and sought him out, moving between conversations. A book she had read described it as turning a radio dial from station to station. She'd believed it was so until today. She could hear what people close to her said. Their words fought for space, overlapping and overpowering each other. She found Victor sitting in an armchair so big it appeared to embrace him. Seeing him there, one hand around his glass, lifting it to his mouth, the other hand on the armrest, her rush to find him became ridiculous. He wasn't thinking of anything but today. If she apologized, she would have had to explain what for, and that might take the evening in an unpleasant direction. She dismissed the man who had interrogated her outside, too. He was a friend of Mike's, like she and Victor were. Victor had just finished telling the two men beside him a story. She arrived after it ended, but his audience still listened, thinking he would continue. "That reminds me of a time," was all the brown-haired ones on the sofa could say before she cut in with a question. So, been a good boy while I was away? Victor's audience wondered if she meant them. Victor stepped up to answer that yes, he had. The brown-haired man said he was Charlie, and the man next to him was Norman. I suppose I should introduce myself a little more, Charlie said. He was born and raised and all the rest in Nevada. Did they know much about Nevada? No? Then the name of his hometown would mean nothing to them. It wasn't that the town was empty, though to tourists it might appear so. Everything was far apart. Some liked this arrangement, others grew to hate it. All had to live with it as long as they were there. No matter how one person might feel, they couldn't convince a shop to move elsewhere, except if others joined in. Small towns such as this were the last place where you could vote with your wallet. And by not living there, we're hitting your home where it counts, Victor jumped in to say. There wasn't much to boycott, nor anything so contentious that people would try. The reason people preferred one place over another, why shops opened and closed, was convenience and quality. My dad used to have a grocery there. He got too old to run it, so I took over, and when I moved away, my brother got it, Charlie said. Victor looked to him, then pointed at Norman, and cocked his head to ask if he was the brother Charlie meant. Charlie ignored him. My dad says quality is the convenience of getting what you want the first time around, and that's something I live by. What, she wondered, could Victor have said to remind him of that? Perhaps the stories were unrelated, and he'd taken the earliest opportunity to talk about himself. He talked like a book, she said, an expression Charlie gave a thin smile, hedging his bets between it being a compliment and an insult. Her impressions of people formed hard and fast. She could be fooled, that she admitted, but not easily. You needed to be quick to disprove her view of you before it set in. That's why she clung so hard to Victor being a comedian. She was sure he would be good at it. He was equally sure it didn't interest him. If Charlie's next story was like his first, Sylvia would remember him as long-winded. Even when he answered with one sentence or half of that, those would be exceptions that proved the rule. Suddenly, just as Norman was about to speak, Mike fell upon Victor and gripped his hand. I've been trying to find you all evening, Mike shouted by way of an introduction. Well, I haven't been hiding, Victor said, jolted by Mike's tone into speaking louder. He rose from the armchair, still holding Mike's hand, so he could shake it a second time while looking right at him. Sylvia didn't know what to make of Mike's all-white suit and tie. He wore it casually, unbuttoned and yet carefully, without wrinkles or creases. She had a simple black dress. Victor's suit was more traditional than Mike's. Cheaper, too, and to compensate for that, he had done it up all the way, despite Sylvia's protests that he looked silly, especially since Norman and Charlie were wearing their jeans and shirts without any embarrassment at all. They weren't sloppy, just underdressed, or rather she, Victor, and even Mike were overdressed. She pointed this out to Mike, who pretended to gasp. And at my own party, too. Victor's told me about you, he said. I see he didn't let his imagination run away with him. Well, I'll let you think about what he told you and what you want to tell me. How did you two meet? He offered her a drink. She waved him away. We knew each other in school. In detention, I think. I asked him the answer to a question, and he gave it to me. No, but wouldn't that be funny? What do you do now? I'm an accountant. I won't pretend it's more complicated than it is. You don't need to be good at math, he said, heading off the remark he was sure she would have made. But you do need to be reliable and have an eye for details. He did, in the end, try to impress her by naming the firms he had worked for and the amounts he had worked with. None of that belonged to me. I would never have dreamed of taking it, but you get giddy when dealing with millions. Mike stayed with them until Sylvia said goodbye. Hearing this, Victor got up on cue. You're right, it is time to go. Who was supposed to be the designated driver? "Neither of us. We can't drive like this," she said, amused that he would even suggest such a thing. "We'll call a cab," Victor proposed, one of the upsides of not being in Nevada. Mike didn't pretend to understand the joke. He laughed out of kindness to his guests, just as he helped Victor into his jacket. Sylvia pushed him towards the door, trying to leave before she found out whether Charlie had heard. That was A Game We Can Play, written and read by Philip Ballerscheff. Again, if you'd like to follow along to the blog that I read these posts from, you can find a link to that in the description. And as always, remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time.